Hello, my name is Akal, and I am a somatic therapist. If you'd like to find out a little bit about the work I do, I also do astrology, etc., etc. You can check out my website down below this video. Today, I'm going to go over Mars. So Mars is really interesting energy, and I think we need to also remember that this is kind of an archetypical force in our lives. And the reason I say force is Mars is interesting in that Mars to me doesn't speak of one's psychological nature in any way. Instead, this is in a lot of ways how our emotions or our energy in motion is directed. So I don't want to conflate anything here. Like oftentimes what ends up happening is people think of emotions and they think of the moon, etc., which is not incorrect. However, in this particular case, we're talking about emotions in the sense of energy in motion. So Mars is very different than, say, like the sun. So the sun is this all-pervasive force that essentially penetrates, quote unquote, penetrates all darkness. Our sun sign essentially is kind of like our overall sort of shine or glow or expression in life. Now Mars is kind of how we go about doing things. So in some ways, I kind of think of the sun and the Mars in very similar ways, except where sun is this overall expression, where the Mars is the channeling of that life force or energy that is typically being expressed. So you can look at the symbol of Mars, which is a circle with a slightly angled upward arrow. And it tells you everything you need to know about Mars, if you understand the symbol, of course, which I'm going to tell you. So the circle. The circle is kind of a shell or an egg. In a lot of ways, it basically represents, I guess, the body, which is kind of the container for life force or energy and spirit. So it represents that sort of shell or restriction. Now Mars wants to break that shell. Mars is not often talked about as a spiritualizing force, but it is. It is, but it's kind of a spiritualizing force in that sort of trial and error kind of way. The best way you can kind of think about this trial and error process is to look at some of the words that are associated with Mars. So we've got accidents, wars, impulsive, instinctual, individuality, sex, opposition, quick, idealistic, aggression. Again, a lot of these words, they simply point to activity. Again, not a lot of cognition involved here, not a lot of thinking. You can think about Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, and I'm not saying Aries people are totally instinctual, but there is this very strong dual nature to Aries. And this dualistic nature where I guess the initial tendency in youth is to act, is to be instinctual and to act out. Over time, what ends up happening is this trial and error process kicks in, where the acting out, you start hitting problems, you hit opposition, you hit forces that ultimately stand in your way of going after whatever it is you're going after. Now, I think it's interesting let me go back to the Aries thing. So the reason why Aries oftentimes, at least most of the Aries folks I know, have this strong dual nature, as well as a deep desire oftentimes to learn meditation and things like that, because of this tendency to simply careen into things and simply smash into things. And it can cause chaos and damage and everything else along the way. So this energy, again, this is a very spiritualizing energy, because if you can look at life from point A to point B, from birth to death, as being essentially one of refinement. I'm thinking, again, very idealistic here in terms of this idea of refinement. Obviously, not everyone's on a spiritual path, but this idea of, in the Taoists, I think, have a wonderful description of this process, which is this basic idea of, we'll use sexual energy, since we're talking about Mars, which is about sex in a lot of ways. It's about the aggression or the movement towards sex. But I think it's funny, when I was reading about sex as it relates to Mars, they said it's oftentimes left totally unfulfilled, meaning that it's kind of just horny. It's the desire or the urge, but it doesn't usually have an outlet. again, if I can think about every dude, if he had a sexual outlet every time he was horny, there'd be a lot of satisfaction on this planet, but I would say there's more dissatisfaction than there is satisfaction. And that's part of Mars's path, is the movement towards these idealistic things, these things we desire and we have this urge for, but it's often left unfulfilled. It's often left empty, because Mars, again, wants you to move towards spirit. So if we're following our desires and we attain this or attain that, and this energy wants to contain things, and I'm going to get into the fundamental energies of Mars in a moment, but this desire to contain things and to want to grab things and hold things and to reach out for things, and again, this movement towards material plane, objects, things and stuff and information. It could be a number of things that you're moving toward, but the point is that there's this energy and it's always moving towards these things, and then it achieves these things, and then it's like, oh, that wasn't at all satisfying. Or maybe it was satisfying and you want to repeat it over and over again, but eventually the satisfaction is diminished. So Mars, on a fundamental kind of level, I'm going to talk about the Gunas now. Now, Gunas are, just as a refresher, for those of you who have not watched all my other videos, the Gunas are the fundamental energies that exist in all creation. So we're talking about tamasic energy, which tamasic energy is that of inertia or contraction. Or in the case of Mars, what we're talking about here is the one mired in density. You get stuck in density. You get stuck in the material plane fixation. Mars is always looking out on the material plane. So you can think about it as, I always have to kind of shift my perspective when I'm talking about Venus and Mars, and I have to remember what they're looking at. Is they're looking at physical things on the mundane plane. The end results are often a spiritualization process, but that's not where they're looking. That's not what those energies are interacting with. So in a lot of ways, Mars and Venus are kind of like our tool chest for the material plane. They in a lot of ways dictate what we move towards, what we attract, as well as, I guess, ultimately how we're going towards those things. So Mars has this tamasic energy on a deep level. On a fundamental level, it's tamasic, meaning it's kind of stuck on the material plane. It's stuck in again, that sort of, that shell. And again, it's stuck in the vehicle, in the shell. Again, going back to the circle. And now what's it moving towards? Well, it's tamasic energy moving towards more tamasic energy, meaning the function of the negative mind. So meaning this is fast energy. So anytime you see negative mind, you're seeing fast. Not necessarily well thought out, but fast. It's quick, responsive energy, and it responds often to oppositional forces, hence the association of wars and aggression being with Mars as well. So this energy, this movement from, like I said, this quick operation along the material plane can kind of be done in three different ways. Again, referencing the Gunas here. So it can be done tamasically. So you would have additional level of tamasic energy added to this, which would be another layer of negative mind, which means to defend. Again, it's quick, it's fast, it's protective. So Mars is the defender. And that's what Yogi Bhajan's description of what he calls aspect one, it's called the defender. So then there's also, it's kind of like a soldier in some ways too. So then there is, if you operate, let's say, rajasically, then it's a bit more proactive. It can, I'll read the word it says. It adds versatility and pragmatic solutions. So versatility and pragmatic solutions, meaning that the process is slowed down a little bit because, again, it's not defensive. There's a pause and then a choice. And again, it doesn't mean that there's a great level of discernment, because the discernment doesn't happen unless one utilizes the neutral mind. Now, the neutral mind is sattvic. It's moving towards harmony and things like that. So if Mars is functioning in a sattvic way, then it ends up basically expressing out onto the material plane towards those things which bring harmony. However, I would say this is a mature placement. This is a mature stance. And I would say this is kind of how Mars maybe operates later in life if somebody has a spiritual path of some sort. I'm going to talk about that arrow a little bit more now. I feel like I need to elaborate on that. So the arrow coming off this shell, off this, I guess ultimately, it's so that circle, that shell, is our internal environment expressed externally. Again, instinctually done. So this arrow, once again, it's facing in a slightly upward direction, meaning that the ultimate outcome from point A to point B, from birth to death, is that of spiritualization ultimately. However, again, it's meeting these oppositions along the way, but this energy, it keeps going. And so it keeps it keeps correcting along the way. And again, it's that trial and error process that we're speaking about. I read an interesting kind of expression, so I'll go ahead and read this to you. It says, Mars is the energy which carries Shiva's power for destruction of the arrogant self-seekers who work against the evolutionary force in manifestation. So that arrow, if it's directed towards those self-serving things, it's going to ultimately smash into opposition. It's going to keep hitting walls. Now, if it ultimately has its expression in, let's say, it's moving towards spiritual goals, it's moving towards service to others, then what ends up happening is that in some ways you can say that there's corrections made along the way, and the universe ultimately kind of gives you an assist. It helps you out. And I think when somebody cultivates their intuition, they can start to utilize this Martian force, this Martian energy in a much more sort of discerning way. And again, it's more of a mature expression of Mars once we are able to get to that point. One final thing I'm going to say about Mars is if you look at the rashis or the sign that it's placed in, like for instance, my Mars is in Gemini, so there's a great deal of inconsistency in my action and my ability to act, and is also, I tend to move towards intellectual things. But more importantly than the sign specifically itself is, I would say, the masculine or the feminine quality of that sign. Or the other way to say this is do we add more aggressiveness or masculine energy to Mars, which is inherently a masculine-driven sign, or do we add a feminine quality, which will slow down that progression and add a certain amount of balance? So if Mars is in, say, Aries, which is, immediately the most instinctual, most impulsive right off the bat. So let's say fire signs, which are positive, proactive, driven, masculine. So Sagittarius, Leo, Aries. And so without going into specifics in terms of the characteristics of these placements, you're getting more masculine energy, more directed energy, more force, more drive. So, and that goes for placements like my own, like Gemini, which is also very driven, but it's mutable. So it adds this sort of level of inconsistency. And it's also what we're driven toward, in terms of like, are we driven towards activities, intellectual things? And again, what on the material plane are we moving towards? That'll end up in a lot of ways be governed by Mars. And again, sexual engagement with Mars is also kind of expressed in a lot of ways through the rashis in terms of like how passionate we are versus how dispassionate we are. Let's say, Cancer and Mars might want the deeper connection. It might want more passionate connection. It wants something that's going to, move its emotions, versus Aquarius. Aquarius is, it's not a little more detachment. Air sign. It's not going to be It doesn't want to go into the passions in quite the same way. So again, just that's one thing you might want to look at with your Mars placement, is whether or not it's in a feminine or a masculine sign. And again, I don't want to say feminine and masculine in the sense of male and female. This is more about sort of divine characteristics of that energy. We could say proactive versus surrendered. That would be another way to kind of look at it. So with all that said, the next segment I'm going to go ahead and show you how I came to connecting Mars with the exercise or the meditation that is associated with it, which is called the Defender, or Aspect 1, from Yogi Bhajan's book, The Mind. All right, so here is Yogi Bhajan's book, The Mind. Mine's in very poor condition. And in the back of this book, we have a chart, which is also tattered and in terrible condition. So the Mars, this aspect 1 that I was mentioning, which is this Defender, you can see the association is with Manas, which is the mind in the sort of traditional sense. So the mind is, in meditation, this is where we get stuck. We get stuck in the mind. We get stuck because the mind, in a way, is very much connected to the mundane or the material plane. It has the possibilities of being much more expansive, etc., but we really don't get the expansion in our lives until we can then transcend the mind and simply be present, and to allow life force and energy to simply flow. So we have tamasic energy on one level added to the negative mind, and that goes to the Defender, aspect 1. So what you do now is you flip through the book, you find aspect 1, the Defender. Here's the expression of its qualities, and the meditation associated with it, which has some complicated words that I'll go over in the next segment. All right, so with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do this particular meditation. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and teach you now this meditation, which goes along with aspect 1, or the Defender, and it is associated with the planet Mars. Now, the reason to do this meditation is to strengthen your Mars placement in your chart. It's to bring clarity to your Mars placement in your chart. It's so that the impulsiveness of Mars is slowed down. The important thing here to keep in mind is that what slows Mars down? Again, think this is instinctual impulsive energy. So what slows down Mars is to get out of your head, to get out of the mind. How you do this is you have to identify with presence, so meaning meditation, etc. So, and this will make sense a little bit here. So one of the ways in which we get out of our mind is we go into feeling and sensing. We go into the body. I think about Mars a lot of times. Mars has this desire for sex. That desire for sex, as I perceive it, is in a lot of ways about the desire to reconnect to the physical form. It's about reconnecting to the body. As you reconnect to the body, you become progressively more centered. Not only are you making better choices in how to direct your energy, but you have more energy for life in general because you're not spinning on nonsense. So this meditation in particular does a couple things that I think is really interesting. One, it's a complex mantra. So it's forcing the mind to really pay attention to the pronunciation and to the words themselves. The second thing that it does is that it involves root lock or mula bandha. Now, root lock and mula bandha, what it does is it pulls your awareness, your ego, your personality out of the etheric space which the mind occupies and down inside the body. It pulls you into the furthest point inside the body in a lot of ways, which is your pelvic floor, your anus, your perineum, your genitals, and your belt line. Mula bandha, that's how you contract mula bandha, is that you'll contract your anus, your perineum, your genitals, and then you'll pull in your belt line. Oftentimes I initiate Mula Bandha simply by lifting my perineum first. However, the perineum is probably, generally speaking, the most insensitive point anywhere along the pelvic floor. The genitals are going to be a little more clear, as well as the anus. So you want to initiate the contraction with the area that you feel is most tactile, that you can feel it the most. You have the greatest kinesthetic awareness of. So now, like I said, the beautiful part of that is that, again, this idea of shifting our awareness back into the body is what this does is actually brilliant. Again, if you can appreciate the significance here, is that in our culture, our center of gravity is here. You know, we see a lot of forward-leaning postures out there. We end up leading with our center of gravity, which unfortunately, like I said, is conditioned to be the mind. Now, what we're doing here is we're learning to move from our navel, which is our body's true center of gravity. Again, if we can move from the navel and we can trust our instincts and trust our intuition, then we end up. Yogi Bhajan made a great statement once about sex. He made the statement about sex that if you move into a relationship, into a sexual dynamic from the second chakra, the universe will not support you. If you move into a relationship or a connection from the sixth chakra or the third eye, the universe supports you. Now, the third eye isn't the mind. Third eye is knowing. It's that deeper knowing. It's the deeper knowing that is attached to intuition. So this meditation will help you cultivate that pause, help you cultivate that intuition and that instinct, so you can then move into your engagements with, faith. Is really a term here. So faith is this acceptance that you're simply accepting that you're being guided. It doesn't have a concern about the outcome. And this is very idealistic, which surprisingly Mars is. Mars is very idealistic. It's always moving towards those higher goals, towards those higher aspirations, those higher expressions. So another thing about this mantra is that it's done on one breath. And Yogi Bhajan says, do this mantra it should take about 15 seconds. So you're going to inhale a deep breath, go through the mantra. By the end of the mantra, you'll be completely out of air. You're going to have root lock completely contracted. Then, like I said, essentially what you're doing is you're reducing the number of breaths per minute that you're actually, so let me back it up here. So the number of breaths per minute dictates in a lot of ways the activity of the mind. If the diaphragm is moving like this, the mind is moving like this. If the diaphragm is moving very slowly, then the mind is moving very slowly. And hence, you're more sattvic, you have more clarity, and you can see, you can see this and that. You can be discerning. So, the mantra, it's complicated here. So the mantra, the first word is Gobinde. And I'm going to put these words up on the screen so you'll see them. Second word is Mukande. Then it's Urare, Appare. Now the next two words have an ANG at the end. Now the ANG, the NG specifically, what ends up happening when you make that sound is that the tongue goes to the roof of the mouth and you vibrate it up here in the sinus. So it's another centering force. Anything that's going to bring you sensation, feeling, a vibration is going to draw your mind back into the form, back into the vehicle. So is vibrated up here. So the next two words are Haryang, Karyang, then it's Nirname, Akame. So I'll go ahead and walk you through this whole mantra, what it sounds like. First thing, fingers are in Gyan Mudra. Extend the arms straight, palms up, arms resting on the knees. then you want to do is, it doesn't specify where the drishti or the eye position is. I like to just look at the tip of my nose, but you can roll the eyes up and look at the brow point or up in the crown. It doesn't specify which drishti you use. I always, like I said, suggest the tip of the nose. So you want to go ahead and choose your drishti. So tip in the nose in my case. And then again, this mantra, we're going to do it on one breath. So you're going to inhale, deep breath. Apply root lock. So you're going to contract the anus, perineum, the genitals, pull in the belt line. And then you're going to maintain this throughout the duration of the mantra. By the end of the mantra, you're going to have fully pulled root lock with all the air out. And then when you inhale, you're going to relax root lock first. Inhale a deep breath, bringing your awareness all the way back down inside the body to the pelvic floor, to the navel point area. Then pull root lock and repeat. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate. Govinde, Mukande, Udare, Appare, Haryang, Karyang, Nirname, Akame. And then to finish this exercise, after you do it for, it says 31 minutes, you want to start with at least 3, build to 11, and then you can get more ambitious from there and build to 31. But in order to finish this exercise, you inhale, retain the breath, and you just want to retain it for 10 to 20 seconds. And then once 10 or 20 seconds are over, exhale, relax. And once again, my suggestion, as always, is to meditate after. Meditate with open awareness, in presence, simply allowing all thoughts, sensations, feelings, emotions to simply rise. So with all that said, I hope you appreciated this video and enjoy it. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave them down below this video, and I'll be glad to answer any of those. So with all that said, thank you much.